Coming up on Arirang News, Hyundai Motor Group announces plans to invest billions of dollars in its plants in the United States, in part to produce electric vehicles there. This comes ahead of President Moon's summit next week with President Biden. South Korea starts giving second doses of the vaccine from AstraZeneca, mostly to people working and living at nursing homes who are now in the 10 to 12-week time frame that's recommended. And Israel prepares to deploy ground troops to the Gaza Strip for the first time in 7 years. Its latest response to continued shelling by Hamas in an increasingly tense situation. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. Hyundai Motor Group has announced plans to invest over $7 billion in its plants in the United States and start producing electric vehicles there. It seems this is in part because of American policy aimed at bringing back jobs. These electric cars will be made at the Hyundai plant in Alabama and the Kia plant in Georgia. Pyeong-ji has the details.
Hyundai Motor Group plans to invest $7.4 billion in the U.S. by 2025 and start manufacturing electric cars in the country. The group said the investment will be used to produce electric vehicles, improve production facilities, and upgrade its smart mobility solutions, including hydrogen energy, robotics, and autonomous driving technology. The investment plan comes ahead of President Moon Jae-in's meeting with U.S. President Joe Biden, scheduled to take place in Washington next week. One industry watcher says the company's decision to invest such a large amount could have been influenced by the need to meet the Biden administration's Buy American policy.
The Buy American policy requires goods to be made by American workers and with American-made components. So for a South Korean company, it seems like Hyundai had no choice but to invest a large amount of money and manufacture its cars in the U.S. in order to sell its products in the country.
Hyundai's move also follows the announcement that U.S. would spend $174 billion to boost electric vehicles and charging. The group will start producing its Hyundai electric vehicles at its Alabama plant within next year, and its affiliate Kia will start production in Georgia soon after. Hyundai already sells its electric vehicles, Kona and Ioniq, in the U.S., and it plans to sell a new EV model, the Ioniq 5, in the country this fall. It also plans to review options to expand its production facility after taking a closer look at U.S. market conditions and the government's new EV policy. The group also added that it will work with the U.S. government and business partners to install hydrogen refueling stations and offer its Nexo hydrogen SUVs. Pyeong-ji, Arirang News.
Because of the global semiconductor shortage, Hyundai and Kia have decided to temporarily shut down some of their factories in Korea next week. That'll happen next Monday and Tuesday at Hyundai's number 5 plant in Ulsan, which makes the mid-sized Tucson SUV, and the Nexo, a hydrogen-powered crossover. Also to be idled on Tuesday is Hyundai's number 3 plant in Ulsan, which makes the Avante compact and the Venue subcompact. As for Kia, it's suspending its number 2 plant just south of Seoul. That plant produces the Pride compact car and the Stonic subcompact SUV. Hyundai had to stop production multiple times this spring, but it's the first time for Kia. South Korea's service and retail sectors are continuing to recover from the pandemic. According to the Finance Ministry's monthly Economic Green Book report on Friday, the country is seeing stronger domestic demand and employment. Overall industrial output was up in March from the month before, for the second month in a row, thanks to the service sector. Retail sales in March rose both on month and on year. And in April overall, the number of people employed increased by 652,000 for the biggest on-year gain in almost 7 years. Exports are strong thanks to demand for semiconductors and petrochemical products. President Moon Jae-in has asked the country's new Prime Minister Kim Boo-kyum to direct all his efforts to overcoming the pandemic and reviving the economy. Speaking to Prime Minister Kim following his appointment ceremony at the Blue House on Friday, Moon asked him to build unity and to step up communication between ministries and with the business sector. Kim said he will work with the Blue House and the government for the development of the country. His term began with his appointment this morning, having been confirmed last night by the National Assembly. President Moon also officially appointed the new Land Minister No Hyung-uk and Science Minister Im Hae-suk. South Korea's export prices rose last month for the 5th month in a row. The Bank of Korea said Friday that the export price index was up in April by 2.2% from the month before. The BOK attributed the rise to higher prices of manufactured goods such as TVs and semiconductors. As for imports, prices were down 0.5% on month, largely due to falling oil prices and a cheaper dollar, which reduced the price of raw materials. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, Global Strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, good to have you back on. Thanks for making time today.
Good afternoon.
Well, let's start with the inflation question, Mr. Yu, but also cryptocurrencies. In February and March, we saw Treasury yields start to rise. Then last month, data show a big rise in U.S. consumer prices. So in terms of asset prices, it would seem some of this is flowing into the crypto market. What would you say about crypto and whether this is a concern?
Right. As for the cryptocurrency market, as you know, the ample liquidity that is available in the market has resulted into such a sharp rise of the cryptocurrency prices. If you look at the M1 growth rate of U.S., it was rising at a significant number. Even after the COVID-19, it's still rising at around 18% year-on-year number. So if that happens, then overall the value of currency goes down and the need for the alternative asset rises. In the past, the alternative asset used to be gold and silver. Now the cryptocurrency are one of them. And if you look at the cryptocurrency market, it grew from $1 trillion at the end of last year to $2.5 trillion in the last several months. That is such an incredible pace of rise. And it is causing a lot of illegal activities and uncertainties, and most of the central banks are quite concerned about this market. So we think that the continuation of inflation and continuation of liquidity injection is still there, and therefore the need for the cryptocurrency will continue to remain such, but we think that the pace of rise is going to be subdued in the future as more regulation and more control will be coming through. And obviously the cryptocurrency or gold or silver will not substitute the original currency, as if that happens, then the central banks are not needed in a global scale. So we think that in the short term, and even on a longer term basis, alternative asset need is there, but nevertheless, the size of the cryptocurrency market is not going to rise much further from the current level.
Well, looking at the stock markets on Wall Street, things bounced back a bit on Thursday from the big declines they've had recently, led by tech stocks. There are plenty of people out there, though, warning there could be a further correction. What's the story in the global markets?
Right. In the past, if you look at the significant correction that we saw, was a result of uncertainty regarding the inflationary number and the possible tapering and also raising interest rate by the central bank. However, we think that the current inflation that we saw in the last month was more of a short-term inflation. If you look at inflation, there are cost-push inflation and demand-pull inflation. And most of the inflation that you are seeing is coming from the cost-push inflation rather than demand-pull inflation. In the short term, yes, there are quite significant increase in demand due to the COVID-19 vaccine impact, and it's going to be quite significant number on YOY number. But if you look at on longer term basis, looking at the unemployment ratios and the salary increase, we think that the pace of demand for consumption is going to be quite reasonable rather than what we saw in a recent few months. So therefore, overall market will probably take some time to go up, but nevertheless, we think that it is expected to go up as the tapering is not going to come through anytime soon. We don't think that the Fed is going to raise interest interest rate until year 2023. So for the while, there will be concern. However, the reality-wise, we don't think that there will be any subtraction of liquidity that we see in the market. So ample liquidity will continue to fuel up the equity market, and overall trend will take some time for the recovery, but nevertheless, the trend should be the same.
Well, it looked to be much the same story here in Korea today. Stocks back up by a significant amount, with retail investors buying, foreigners and institutions selling. Tell us about the local market.
Right. As you said, the KOSPI is up about 1% and KOSDAQ is up about 1.6%. A lot of people were concerned about the market. Also, there was option closing day yesterday. So all in all, people were quite concerned, and people were playing this idea about the interest rate rise, and also that is negative news for the growth stock, particularly say for Korea semiconductor or electric cars market. However, the reality is not such. We are seeing continuation of unemployment ratio falling, a very significant rise in export. Global demand is continued to be quite ample, and liquidity condition is still reasonably high. And if you look at the consumer deposit numbers, it is still very, very high number, well above 70 trillion level. And that means that the domestic retail investor will continue to buy the Korean market despite all this concern and the selling pressure that coming from the short selling by some of the hedge funds of overseas. All in all, we think that the fundamental matters the most, and the Korean fundamental seems to be very strong at this point in time.
You mentioned exports rising for Korea, not only in terms of volume, they're also fetching higher prices, including for semiconductors and other things in last month. So for the first time in 5 months, also the price of imports were down. So what's happening when it comes to trade?
Yes, clearly these price movement of export and import are saying that Korea's fundamental is going to be further improving in the future. If you look at the April number, export prices were up by about 2.2% from the previous month. And it is continued to show 5 consecutive months of rise. The exported computers, electronics, and optical devices jumped 7%, and the primary metal products also gained 3.3%. If you look at the import price, however, it has fallen first time in a 5-month period. It is down by 0.5% from the previous month, and this is quite positive news because Korea obviously imports a lot of the raw material goods, and raw material goods prices were rising very rapidly in the past. That has resulted negatively, but going into the future, given the fact that the crude oil prices are quite stable at around $60 odd, and that resulted into quite reasonable import prices decline. And it seems that the mining products also fell, and overall it seems to indicate that the overall margins for the manufacturing companies of Korea are going to even further rise in the future, which means that the earnings growth rate of Korean manufacturers would continue to be quite strong going into the second quarter of this year.
Got it. All right, Mr. Yu, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much for sharing your insights with us as always, and have a great weekend.
Thank you. You too.
South Korea has started administering second doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine to people who are now in the 10 to 12-week time frame that's recommended for dose number 2. Second doses will continue to get priority, and these are mostly for people who live or work at nursing homes. Han Sung-woo has this report.
Nursing home residents and staff under 65 years old are among the first in line for their second dose of the AstraZeneca vaccine starting Friday. Those under 30 who received their first dose before the government's age restriction was implemented due to blood clot concerns can decide themselves if they want it or not. Around 926,000 people are eligible for the second dose between now and June. People who don't want the second dose now but choose to get it later will not be stripped of their priority recipient status. However, health authorities are urging active participation, noting that data from abroad shows side effects are less frequent for the second dose. The rollout is expected to kickstart the recent slowdown in South Korea's vaccine campaign, along with the nationwide distribution of millions of AstraZeneca vaccines from Friday to early June.
Our supply is enough to vaccinate 30 million people with their first doses by late June. Now is the time to focus on actually inoculating people with the vaccines we've procured.
So far, only some 825,000 people, or 1.6% of South Korea's population, have been fully vaccinated. And with 7,139 more recipients, the number of people who've received their first dose remains at around 3.7 million, or about 7.2% of the population. Meanwhile, South Korea reported 747 new cases of COVID-19 on Friday, with cluster infections still popping up nationwide. It's the second day in a row for the daily figure to be in the 700 range, pushing the total number of cases over 130,000. All but 18 of Friday's new cases were transmitted locally, with regions outside the capital area accounting for over 40% of the total. 2 more people died, raising the national COVID-19 death toll to 1,893. 한성우, Arirang News.
Tomorrow is Teachers' Day in South Korea, and many teachers say they too want to be vaccinated. The schools also want them to be so that in-person classes can be held safely, especially at vocational schools, for example, where students learn hands-on skills like auto repair and machining. Our Jang Tae-hyun went to find out more at South Korea's oldest vocational school and sent this report.
For over a year, South Korean schools have been holding in-person classes at limited capacity, combining them with online learning. But there are some schools which need to hold classes face-to-face, such as vocational schools, which teach a variety of technical courses.
We have classes like machine operation and mechanics and biochemical engineering. Vocational schools like ours can operate more smoothly if we hold in-person classes. We are partially offering online lessons, but it would be better to do them face-to-face if the COVID-19 situation improves.
The country is planning to resume full in-person classes next semester, and many teachers say that getting vaccinated is important to create a safe school environment.
I'll get vaccinated so that I can teach students face-to-face. I think other teachers will consider getting theirs too because they know the importance of in-person classes.
Any injection or any medical treatment have some side effect, but the positive effect is much better than the negative, so I'm ready to get the vaccination.
School nurses and special educational needs teachers nationwide started getting inoculated in mid-April. And daycare center, kindergarten, and first and second grade elementary teachers are scheduled to be vaccinated in June, followed by high school seniors and their teachers from July to August. In the meantime, some students say that teachers and seniors should get their shots as soon as possible.
I'd like to be vaccinated quickly. I'm not going to refuse. I'll feel relieved after getting inoculated.
But to be able to return to in-person learning, the nation first needs to establish herd immunity through vaccinations. Jang Tae-hyun, Arirang News.
In its latest move against Hamas, Israel is massing troops on the border with the Gaza Strip in preparation for a potential ground invasion. Clashes are occurring between civilians too now in some mixed Jewish-Arab neighborhoods. Lee Kyung-eun has the latest.
The Israel-Gaza conflict escalates further, with Israel saying it has begun ground operations in Gaza against Hamas. Israel's military, reversing its previous statement, said ground and air forces are deployed along its border and are currently attacking the Gaza Strip. It gave no details about the operations, but officials say some 3,000 troops have been mobilized in recent days. If the troops actually cross the border, it will be the first time since the 2014 war that Israel has entered Gaza. The escalating tensions follow 4 days of rocket fire and airstrikes. Israel's military struck what it described as intelligence and business buildings used by Hamas militants in Gaza. Hamas, meanwhile, fired further barrages of rockets toward Israel, saying it's only a small part of its capabilities. According to Palestinian officials in Gaza, more than 100 people have been killed in the 4 days of conflict. The violence has also spread to mixed Jewish and Arab communities in Israel.
It was never like this, in this scale, never. There used to be small crimes, small fires.
We need to live here together. Coexistence, we need to be together, partners, to be partners to each other.
Amid growing calls for de-escalation from international community, Hamas had previously expressed the possibility of a ceasefire, which Israel has rejected. Israel and Hamas have fought 3 wars since Hamas seized control in Gaza in 2007. Lee Young-eun, Arirang News.
3 U.S. senators have proposed a resolution welcoming President Moon Jae-in to the United States next week. The resolution is also to recognize the importance of the South Korea-U.S. relationship and safeguarding peace and prosperity on the Korean Peninsula. It's been moved on to the Foreign Relations Committee and can reasonably be expected to pass before President Moon's visit. Hong Yu reports.
U.S. senators proposed on Thursday a bipartisan resolution reaffirming the importance of the South Korea-U.S. alliance ahead of next week's summit between the leaders of the 2 countries. They emphasize the need for continuous effort between South Korea, the U.S., and Japan for the denuclearization of North Korea and the promotion of human rights. Democratic Senators Bob Menendez and Edward Markey and Republican Senators James Risch and Mitt Romney took part in the resolution. They all welcomed President Moon Jae-in's visit to the U.S., saying that their bilateral relationship is the linchpin of the peace and prosperity of the Korean Peninsula and the Indo-Pacific region. The senators call the South Korea-U.S. alliance one of the strongest in the world as they share economic interests, common values, and mutual trust. In the resolution, the senators used the word complete, verifiable, irreversible dismantlement to refer to the efforts by the 2 countries to achieve denuclearization of North Korea. They said the 2 countries are devoted to closely coordinated diplomatic efforts arranged through bilateral strategy. Menendez said that he anticipates they and President Moon can cooperate against threats from North Korea and also pave the way for peace on the Korean Peninsula. Markey evaluated President Moon's visit to the U.S. as a reaffirmation of the ironclad partnership. And Romney emphasized that South Korea and the U.S. must unite to deal with global challenges, including the threats posed by the North's nuclear capability. The senators also promised to keep working together in medical sectors to combat COVID-19 and recognize Korea's support in responding to global challenges, including the pandemic. President Moon is scheduled to hold a summit with U.S. President Biden next Friday for the first time, in which they are expected to discuss the denuclearization of North Korea, COVID-19, climate change, and economic cooperation. Hong Yu, Arirang News.
The South Korean government is looking at proposing talks with Japan about Tokyo's plan to dump contaminated water from Fukushima into the ocean. The government says aside from the IAEA's verification process, there needs to be a bilateral channel for South Korea to convey its stance and exchange more information. Seoul expects that Tokyo would agree to talks since Japan has said it's willing to respond if its neighbors ask for more information about its plan. The government's also reportedly considering sending officials to the Fukushima nuclear plant to gather more information. For K-pop fans, there's now a museum in Seoul dedicated to the genre's biggest stars, BTS. Fans can learn more about the band's music and even see artwork dedicated to them. Also, BTS will be the first all-Asian group to make the cover of Rolling Stone in next month's issue. Kim Sung-min reports.
As K-pop fans enter the basement, BTS appear on a huge screen to greet them. Better known as the BTS Museum, HYBE INSIGHT, a new cultural complex of K-pop content, is opening to the public in Seoul. From touching different sound waves to smelling the scent of the songs, the place allows fans to explore K-pop music using all 5 senses through cutting-edge technology. Under the 3 main themes, sound, movement, and story, fans can better connect with the artist while appreciating the power of music. The journey first begins with the innovative sound section. Here, visitors can directly experience the process of creating the best sounds for the songs by playing with the equipment used by sound engineers and producers. The dynamic movement section reveals the inside of HYBE music interpreted through dance moves. Exploring the stories behind the songs at the Inspiring Stories section will help fans gain a deeper understanding of the music's message. Another section that visitors should not miss is Seven Faces, a collaborative work in which art by Taiwanese-American artist James Jean portrays the 7 members of BTS. Visitors can enjoy the exhibition for a maximum of 2 hours and should book in advance through the official website or mobile application. Tickets cost around $20 each. Meanwhile, BTS will be covering the June issue of U.S. pop culture magazine Rolling Stone, becoming the first all-Asian group to do so since the foundation of the magazine. Rolling Stone praised how the 7 young superstars rewrote music business rules and became the biggest band in the world. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.